It began with a light that was not of the Astronomicon. A flicker, brief yet blinding, like a second sun tearing its way into the void. For a moment, the star charts trembled. Even the machine spirits of ancient augurs wailed in confusion. The void ship Magnus Day reported an impossible reading, a living object descending at impossible speed through the upper atmosphere of Terra herself. When it struck the surface, no crater was formed, no seismic tremor registered, only silence, followed by the faint, almost casual sound of footsteps against cracked marble. He came from no known world, bore no sigil, no genetic marker, no warp resonance. His flesh was unscarred by radiation or faith. His garments were an absurdity, yellow fabric-like armor that neither the Mechanicus nor the Inquisition could categorize. His head shone smooth as a burnished servo skull, his eyes empty, not from madness but from boredom. The Imperial authorities could not name him, yet Vox rumors spread like wildfire. A being of impossible power, untraced by the warp, unrecorded in any gene seed archive. A being who could shatter Astartes plate with a flick, silence a demon prince with a tap. They would call him many things: anomaly, heresy, weapon, saint, perhaps even God. But in whispers, in the hidden slums and data vaults of the Underhive, he would be called one name: the One Punch Man. Before we descend further into this impossible chronicle, into the collision of absolute power and absolute despair, take a moment to fortify the signal. If this transmission reaches you through the warp's distortions, subscribe, share, and preserve it in your data archives. The truth of this being may not last long. Even the Ordos erase what they cannot explain. The sky above Terra had not been blue for 10,000 years. It was a bruise of ash and iron, a wounded thing hanging above the spires and catacombs of humanity's cradle. Billions toiled beneath it, huddled masses in the Underhive chanting laborers in the Manufactoria, pallid priests whispering into rusted Vox grills, all unaware that something impossible was about to fall from the void. It began as a false dawn. For an instant, the perpetual night was pierced by a streak of gold, a comet that did not burn but glowed, steady and unyielding. No re-entry alarm sounded, no orbital defense lasers fired. The Mechanicus sensors registered it, then unregistered it, a line of data they could not categorize. Even the machine spirit stuttered in disbelief. Then came the silence. Not the heavy, sacred silence of cathedrals, but the absence of all things: wind, hum, prayer. The object struck the surface with no impact, as if the world itself had chosen not to resist. When the dust cleared, there was only a crater that wasn't a crater. A shallow depression in the blackened stone, and within it, a man. He stood slowly, brushing ash from his shoulder. His suit, bright yellow, trimmed with white and bound by a crimson cape, looked almost mocking against the colorless landscape. Around him, pilgrims knelt instinctively, believing they had witnessed a miracle. Others fled, crying heresy, certain a demon had taken human form. His face betrayed no emotion. His eyes were untroubled, bored, like a god who expected more from existence than this gray ruin. The first to reach him were the laborers of the district, men and women too exhausted by life to feel fear. They spoke to him, asked his name, offered him recaf and silence in equal measure. He only blinked, confused by their reverence. When one child asked if he was hungry, he paused as though remembering that he could be. "Yeah," he said softly. "A little." The sound of his voice rippled through the Vox lines like a ghost, transmitting far beyond its origin. By the time the Adeptus Arbits traced the disturbance, every data slate within 10 kilometers had corrupted into static, marked by a single word fragment: punch. Above, within the sealed towers of the Adeptus Custodes, alarms whispered through gold corridors. A presence of unrecorded pattern had been detected walking the streets of the throne world. Not storming, not rampaging, walking, slowly, aimlessly. The custodians prepared themselves not for war, but for understanding, something far rarer and far more dangerous. Saitama, though no one yet knew his name, wandered through the city of saints and corpses. He looked up at the sky where lightning danced through the pollutant haze and muttered to himself, "Guess I'm not on Earth anymore." His tone carried no fear, only mild inconvenience, as though he had taken the wrong bus rather than crossed realities. The air tasted of metal and incense. Servo skulls drifted overhead, their lenses focusing on him with machine curiosity. He waved politely at one, which immediately overloaded and fell from the sky in a puff of sparks. He sighed, pocketed a fragment of its broken lens, and continued walking toward the horizon of towers that pierced the heavens. By the time the custodian strike patrol arrived, the district was silent again. Those who had witnessed him were kneeling, heads bowed, repeating a prayer they could not remember learning. One of them, a blind mendicant, wept openly and whispered, "He looked bored, my lord." The man who fell from the stars looked bored. From orbit, the inquisitorial satellite struggled to focus. The anomaly emitted no energy, no warp signature, no radiation. He was, by all measurable standards, ordinary. And yet, wherever his footsteps fell, the static of the warp thinned, as if reality itself grew steadier around him. Far below, in a narrow alley that smelled of oil and decay, Saitama found a cracked mirror leaning against a wall. He stared into it for a long while, his reflection warped by grime and centuries of neglect. Then he sighed, muttering, "Still bald." A nearby servitor twitched at the sound, its mechanical prayers stalling mid-verse. The wind began to move again. Bells tolled in distant cathedrals, and somewhere deep beneath the palace, a heartbeat, ancient, mechanical, divine, seemed to hesitate. It was not fear, not yet, but awareness. Something old and sacred had turned its gaze toward the surface of Terra. Above the hive towers, lightning traced the imperial aquila across the clouds, and for a heartbeat, the world felt alive again. Somewhere in that moment, something, or someone, smiled. The man who had destroyed gods by accident had arrived in a world that worshipped them by necessity. And though he did not yet know it, the galaxy would never be the same after his first, simple step. Within the sanctified walls of the imperial palace, the light was not sunlight but relic light, refracted through stained glass centuries thick, filtered by incense and dust until it resembled something holy. The custodians moved through it like living statues, each gesture deliberate, each breath a sermon in motion. They were the Emperor's chosen, forged beyond human frailty, guardians of his immortal form. And yet, for the first time in an age, uncertainty crept between their golden armor plates. Reports had arrived in whispers. A being had fallen from the heavens without a vessel or shield, had walked from fire unmarked, and now moved freely across the outer districts of the throne world. Such tales were normally the concern of arbites or inquisitorial acolytes, not the custodian guard. But the Emperor's will was clear, or perhaps it was their own unease that compelled them. If a being could enter Terra unbidden, what barrier remained sacred? Captain Archon Valorous stood before the inner gates of the Sanctum Imperialis, his helmet under one arm, his gaze fixed upon the great mural of the Emperor triumphant. "Anomaly," he murmured, the word tasting wrong in his mouth. Beside him, Shield Captain Raiden adjusted his halberd, the weapon's haft humming softly with restrained power. "If the machine priests speak true, this one came from nothing," Raiden said. No warp trace, no descent vector, no echo in the Astronomicon. He simply appeared. Archon frowned. No one simply appears on Terra. The custodians descended from the palace in silence, their transport cutting through the haze like a golden blade. They moved with reverence even in haste, for to set foot upon the throne world was to walk across the Emperor's own skin. Below, the city seethed, rivers of humanity flowing between spires and manufactoria, a chorus of a billion voices raised in work, prayer, and madness. Somewhere within that endless tide walked a man in yellow. Saitama, oblivious to the converging forces of history, had found himself wandering through what might once have been a marketplace. The air reeked of burnt oil and incense. Vendors called out hollow offers for ration packs and machine-blessed bread. He bought one with a strange coin he still had in his pocket, only to realize the vendor had fled before completing the sale. "Guess it's free then," he muttered, chewing thoughtfully. Kind of stale. The custodians located him easily, guided not by energy signatures or psychic traces, but by the absence of them. In a world alive with endless static, Saitama was a void of stillness. Their transport descended in a halo of gold fire, landing with a sound like a cathedral door closing. The crowd scattered instantly, falling to their knees, faces pressed into the dust. Only Saitama remained standing, tilting his head as the massive warriors approached. He blinked once at their ornate armor, the gold catching the pale light, and said casually, "Nice cosplay." Arkin halted a few meters away, his voice echoing through the Vox grill, low and reverent. "You stand upon the throne world of mankind. Identify yourself." Saitama looked puzzled. I'm just a hero for fun." Raiden's gauntlet tightened around his halberd. The words meant nothing, yet carried a strange weight. "You claim allegiance to no house, no chapter?" "I don't know what those are," Saitama replied. "I was just out on a walk and then, well, I guess I ended up here." Arkin studied him, trying to reconcile the man's unthreatening presence with the impossible readings. Every scan showed him as a normal human, weak, unarmed, unsanctioned, and yet something in the air changed around him. The scent of ozone faded. The hum of the warp receded. Even the servo skulls that hovered near the custodians began to drift off, their machine spirits confused by the calm. "What is he, Captain?" whispered Raiden through private Vox. "I don't know," Arkin answered, "but the Emperor's peace feels closer when he's near." Saitama yawned, stretching his arms lazily. "So, are you guys like cops or something?" For a moment, neither custodian spoke. To be mistaken for law enforcement was a blasphemy they had no protocol for. Yet there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine, almost childlike confusion. Arkin found himself lowering his weapon. He realized with a start that he was not afraid. The Golden Giant stood before a man who could not possibly exist, and for the first time in memory, they felt the faint pulse of curiosity, a human thing, fragile and ancient. The silence between them stretched until it felt sacred. Then, without warning, the Vox in Arkin's helm erupted with distorted chanting. A Mechanicus choir from orbit was transmitting emergency hymns. Fragmented verses filled the air, each one repeating a single line. "The man of the light has fallen. The man of the light walks." Saitama looked up, squinting at the sky. "Man of the light? That's a weird nickname." Raiden turned to Arkin, uneasy. "Shall we detain him?" Arkin shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. Some things are not meant to be contained." Saitama shrugged, smiled faintly, and walked past them. Neither custodian moved to stop him. His footsteps echoed softly across the stone, the sound too ordinary to belong to a miracle. Above them, lightning rolled again, distant and patient. In the highest tower of the palace, beneath the throne's dying light, something vast stirred, not awakening, but listening, and far below, in the depths of Terra, a Mechanicus chorus began to hum a hymn that had not been heard since before the Age of Strife. The Emperor's world had taken its first breath in 10,000 years. Deep beneath the ashen veins of Terra, where the air hummed with machine litanies and the scent of burning incense clung like guilt, the Mechanicus sang. The Manufactorum spires were alive with sound, the grinding of gears, the static prayers of servitors, the endless droning hymns to the Omnissiah. But on this day something changed. The rhythm faltered, the hum misaligned. A song older than the forge began to leak from the speakers of the dead. Magos Dominus Zeltarn stood before the servitor choir, his augmetic eyes flickering in confusion. The choir was composed of 1,000 flesh-ruined bodies wired into the cathedral walls, their mouths repurposed into vox horns, their voices harmonized by sacred circuitry. They were not supposed to deviate. Their hymns had run unbroken since the days of the Great Crusade. Yet now the words that emerged from their reconstructed throats were not in the cant Mechanicus. Lux venet. Vir lucis ambulat. Unus ictus purgat peccatum. The Magos froze. He had not heard High Gothic spoken by machine in centuries. His mechadendrites twitched, trying to trace the data origin. But the logic streams came from everywhere, from the choir, the conduits, even the sanctified walls. He realized with growing dread that the machine spirit itself was dreaming. A junior tech priest approached, robes singed by the heat of nearby plasma furnaces. Magos, the Vox relays across the entire sector echo the same phrase. "We have purged and recalibrated thrice." It continues. Zeltarn's voice was a static rasp. "There are no errors. The Omnissiah does not err. If the choir sings, we listen." Outside the Manufactorum, Saitama wandered through the smog-choked avenues, unaware of the sacred panic rippling through the Mechanicus network. His footsteps carried no sound of sanctity, just the dull thud of a man who had nothing better to do. He looked up at the spires, at the endless rivers of fire pouring from chimneys and muttered, "Man, this place really needs a cleaning service." A pair of Skitari vanguards stood watch near a data shrine, their red cloaks stirring in the hot wind. They saw him pass, an unmarked human in yellow cloth, and raised their galvanic rifles automatically. Yet when his eyes met theirs, something halted the signal between intent and action. Their augmetic limbs hesitated. Their targeting reticules flickered. One of them lowered his weapon without understanding why. They did not speak. They could not. But both turned their lenses toward the Manufactorum Towers, where the servitor choir's hymn rose higher and higher. The air shimmered with static and the faint scent of ozone, as if the universe itself were catching its breath. Seltarn listened from the central dais as the voices merged into a single impossible note, not mechanical, not human. It was pure tone, layered with something like grief. The sound resonated through his augmetics, through the ferrocrete beneath his feet, through the very circuits of his mind. Images bloomed in his thoughts, a bald man standing under a sun that was not the Emperor's, a world of blue and peace, a punch that tore through gods like paper. The Magos fell to one knee, trembling. "This cannot be," he whispered, though even as he said it, data fragments compiled across his internal cogitators. Energy without signature, kinetic without origin, being without flux. The servitor's eyes glowed white. They spoke as one. "He walks. The man of the light walks." Seltarn turned to the nearest adepts. "Transmit to the priesthood of Mars. Invoke Archive Sigma 7. We have received a prophecy through the flesh of the machine." But the data link refused to comply. Every channel repeated the same pattern. A pulse, steady, slow, almost like a heartbeat. Across the sector, thousands of devices, from ancient cogitators to handheld Auspex units, began to emit that same rhythmic pulse. Even the great forges slowed their work, as if compelled to breathe in time with the impossible frequency. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the song stopped. The servitors' mouths fell silent. The only sound was the hissing of coolant and the distant hum of power conduits. The Magos stared into the stillness, his logic centers flooded with a strange sensation he had no word for. Not fear, not reverence, perhaps anticipation. He turned to his adepts, his mechanical voice trembling with a fragment of humanity long discarded. "Something has entered the machine god's domain," he said, "and the machine god approves." Above, in the open air, Saitama had found his way to a collapsed walkway overlooking the city. From here, the sprawl of Terra stretched endless and broken. Cathedrals like mountains, lights flickering like distant stars swallowed by smog. He sat down on a piece of rubble and unwrapped the remains of his ration bread. It was hard as stone. He bit into it anyway. Somewhere below, the servitor choir's final note reached him as a faint vibration in the ground. He frowned, looked around, then shrugged. Weird music. He finished his bread, dusted his gloves, and stood. Far above, something vast stirred in the heavens, not in the warp but in reality itself, bending faintly toward this ordinary man. Unseen to all, the Imperial data net began to archive the impossible signal. Every instance of it was tagged with the same unknown designation: Saitama, class undefined, priority, divine anomalous, clearance, denied. The Mechanicus would debate for centuries whether the song had been a warning or a greeting. But for now, the city merely hummed in its afterglow, waiting for the next verse of the impossible story to begin. Far beyond Terra, in the cold black throat of the void where star systems rot like old fruit, the orcs stirred. They did not know of Terra, nor of the Emperor's slow, failing pulse. They knew only of the sound that had echoed across the immaterium, a sound that was not sound at all but an absence. The psychic tides that usually churned with rage, madness, and joy suddenly thinned, as if someone had punched a hole straight through the warp's laughter. On the fringes of a dead system, aboard a crescent-shaped hulk cobbled from wrecked Imperial and Eldar ships, a warboss named Graxmasha the Immense squatted on his throne of iron bones. He scratched his chin absently, staring at the void. Normally, the endless hunger for war beat inside his skull like a drum, but now it felt different. The drum was silent, replaced by a steady rhythm that echoed faintly through his thick skull. Now?" he grumbled. "Why is it so quiet?" The nearby weird boy twitched. eyes glowing with green fire, his staff crackling with energy that refused to discharge. "Boss, I think I heard something, but it wasn't right. It wasn't shouting or screaming or fighting. It was like a punch, but it didn't hit nothing." Graxmasha leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "A punch, eh?" "Yeah, boss, a big gun, like the kind that ends a fight before it starts." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Graxmasha began to grin, a wide, toothy grin full of jagged teeth and madness. "That sounds like a proper fight to me." The wah banners flapped in stale air as orcs began to stir from their stupor, drawn by a psychic itch none of them could name. Mech boys argued with pain boys. Boys punched each other awake, and somewhere deep within the ship, the Gargant engines began to rumble without orders. A tide of green laughter rolled across the decks, loud and eager. Something was calling them. Not a voice, not even a thought, but a promise. Across the void, orcs from scattered sectors felt it too. A hunger, yes, but a pure one, stripped of rage and hate. They could feel that somewhere out there was a being who could fight. Not just fight, but win. They didn't know who or what or where, only that the universe had offered them the impossible, a worthy opponent. Within hours, the psychic field that connected all orcs ignited like a forest fire. Ships began to move, ramshackle fleets coalescing into formation by instinct alone. They followed the faint echo, that clean, singular pulse that had carved through the warp. And though no orc could have charted a course through the stars, every one of them pointed toward Terra. Meanwhile, on the throne world itself, the Mechanicus were still decoding fragments of the signal. The Adeptus Custodes were tightening their patrols, and the Ecclesiarchy had already declared the Man of the Light a possible saint, or a heresy to be purged, depending on which sermon one listened to. Only Saitama remained unchanged. He had found a quiet alley near the hab blocks, where the air was slightly less toxic and the noise somewhat tolerable. He sat cross-legged on the cracked ground, watching a procession of pilgrims shuffle by. Their faces were wrapped in cloth. Their eyes were hollow with devotion. One of them stopped and handed him a small brass token engraved with the imperial aquila. "For the Emperor," she whispered. He accepted it politely, pocketing the token with a nod. "Thanks, lady." He didn't know that. Somewhere in the outer reaches of the galaxy, millions of orcs were already roaring his name without knowing it. To them, he was not Saitama. He was da fist dat broke da noise. The warp shimmered with their laughter, but even the chaos gods, who often fed on such psychic eruptions, recoiled. The laughter of the orcs was no longer theirs to claim. It was too pure, too bright. It carried no hate, only joy, and that terrified them more than any hatred ever could. In the eye of terror, Khorne paused his endless slaughter for the briefest instant. He felt something like confusion, a blow thrown without anger, a strike delivered without bloodlust. Even he could not parse it. "Who dares fight without fury?" he rumbled, but the warp gave no answer. On Terra, a storm gathered. The Astronomicon flickered. Astropaths screamed in their sleep, dreaming of a bald man standing in sunlight so bright that even the warp could not touch it. And somewhere between those two infinities, between the madness of orc laughter and the sanctity of human faith, Saitama sneezed. Must be dusty," he muttered, rubbing his nose. At that moment, light years away, Graxmasha slammed his claw into the control panel of his flagship. "Set a course, boys. We's going where the punch came from. If there's some git what can make the warp shut up, I'm gonna crump him meself." 1,000 engines roared to life, each fueled by junk, hope, and sheer stupidity. The WAG banners unfurled, painted with crude depictions of fists and shining bald heads. The void trembled. The warp snarled. The green tide began to move. Terra would soon know the laughter of 1,000,000 orcs, and one man who could silence it with a single swing. The universe itself seemed to lean forward, holding its breath. In the deepest vault of the Imperial Palace, beyond any chamber where mortal foot may tread, the Emperor of Mankind sat immobile upon the golden throne. 10,000 years of endless vigilance had calcified his divine flesh into a monument of agony and endurance. Tubes as thick as cathedrals ran from the base of his throne into the bedrock of Terra. His body was a corpse machine. His soul was a furnace. For millennia, that soul had burned steady, not bright, not dim, a constant weary flame that guided humanity through darkness. But tonight, it flickered. Across the Astronomicon, psychers screamed and clawed at their eyes as the holy light of the Emperor pulsed erratically, once, twice, then steadied again. Some thought it a tremor. Others felt something else, a disturbance that was not evil but alien in its purity. Deep within the throne room, the custodes knelt in stillness. None spoke, none moved, but all felt it, a resonance like a heartbeat echoing beneath the stone. Then, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor dreamed. The vision came not as words or memories, but as an image burned into the infinite. A man, bald, plain, unassuming, and standing in the ruins of a star, his fist glowing with impossible light. Around him, demons screamed, not in pain but in confusion. They dissolved into dust before they could even comprehend why they were dying. The Emperor's mind, vast beyond any mortal understanding, probed the edges of this image. It was neither warp-born nor divine. It carried no psychic residue, no trace of the Empyrean. It was clean, a presence completely detached from the immaterial realm, as though the laws of both reality and unreality had decided to step aside for it. This, the Emperor realized, was not a man of chaos nor order. Not a psyker, not a mutant, not even a demigod. It was something worse, or perhaps something better. A mortal who had transcended struggle itself. In that instant, for the first time in centuries, the Emperor felt amusement. A whisper drifted from his throne, carried on a current of psychic residue so faint that even the custodes could not discern it. A man who seeks nothing. Even the gods fear such men. Above the surface of Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus's astropaths were in crisis. The Astronomicon's pattern had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Tech priests chanted louder, adjusting the feed lines into the throne's pylons, fearing malfunction. But it was no malfunction. The Emperor's will had moved. Through that movement, an unthinkable thing occurred. Somewhere deep in the Imperial Palace, one of the Emperor's countless golden eyes, desiccated, lifeless, and twitched. Just once, a custodian noticed. He didn't breathe for a full minute. When he did, he whispered to no one in particular. He sees again. Word spread through the palace like a ghost. Servitors did not comprehend it. Scribes did not believe it. Priests denied it outright. Yet the faithful could feel it. The pilgrims in the lower hive stopped in their tracks as a warmth spread through the cold air. Some fell to their knees, believing the Emperor had blessed them. Others screamed that the end was near. Both were, in their own way, correct. In a silent chamber far below, Malkador's empty throne sat untouched, layered in centuries of dust. Yet for the briefest moment that dust trembled, as if a sigh of memory passed through the stone. Meanwhile, Saitama walked the streets of the upper hive, watching a child kick a tin can down an alley. The kid laughed when the can bounced into a puddle and splashed an enforcer's boots. The enforcer shouted, the kid ran, and Saitama smiled faintly. He didn't know that his very presence was rewriting the physics of the warp around him. The immaterium, unable to categorize him, simply refused to perceive him. It flowed around him like water avoiding a stone. Where he walked, the shadows dimmed, the psychic noise faded, and demons found themselves unable to look his way. Elsewhere, in the black cathedral that was the warp itself, the chaos gods took notice. Tzeentch's many eyes blinked furiously. The skeins of fate rippled like torn parchment. Something moves that should not. A soul unthreaded, a void in the weave. Nurgle, ancient and bloated, turned his smile downward. I cannot feel it rot. It does not change. It cannot decay. How dull. Slanesh shuddered in ecstasy and dread. Perfection without desire? It is an affront to art itself. And Khorne said nothing. His brass throne cracked under his clenched fists. For once, there was no anger. Only silence, because he understood what the others could not. This one-punch man was not an enemy. He was the end of conflict itself. A being whose existence rendered war meaningless, and in a universe built upon endless war, that was true annihilation. On Terra, the Emperor's dream deepened. He saw Saitama standing before him, not as a challenger, but as a man looking slightly lost, perhaps asking for directions. And though his voice had not been heard by human ears in 10,000 years, a sound escaped his dry, mummified lips, a laugh. Just one. Quiet, broken, almost imperceptible, but it was laughter all the same. The custodes at the foot of the throne froze. One dropped his spear. Another fell to his knees, trembling. For the first time since the heresy, the Emperor of Mankind remembered what it was to smile. The Astronomicon pulsed brighter than ever before, a beam of golden fire that pierced the warp like a spear. The psychers who survived that moment later spoke of a vision. A single bald man standing at the edge of the galaxy, staring into the darkness, and in the darkness flinching first. The Emperor whispered again, this time not in words but in intent, "Find him." And across the stars, the Imperium began to stir. The Inquisition reactivated dormant assets. The custodes donned their war plate. The Grey Knights received encrypted orders that made even them question sanity. Because somewhere in the bowels of the Hive, an ordinary man with no aura, no power armor, and no weapon was about to change the fate of the galaxy. The first reports arrived in fragments, corrupted Vox transmissions, eyewitness accounts from lowborn workers, and desperate messages from sanctioned psychers who spoke of a man who walked through demons as if they were mist. Most were dismissed as superstition. In the Imperium of Man, 1,000 miracles and 1,000 horrors were born every hour. What was one more tale of madness among billions? Yet, as always, there were those who listened. In the shadowed halls of the Ordo Malleus, Inquisitor Erastes Vale stood before a flickering holo display, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Lines of code and sigils scrolled down the projection, fragmentary reports translated from a dozen Hive world dialects. One phrase appeared too many times to ignore: the man with the empty aura. Vale had seen much in his service. He had hunted demons across the Eye of Terror, executed heretics on Mars itself, and sanctioned entire worlds into ash. But this was new. Psychers who claimed they couldn't sense him, a warp echo that did not exist. A man immune to terror, to pain, to faith. He turned toward his adjutant, a gaunt woman whose bionic eye flickered red. "What do we know?" "Nothing concrete, my lord," she said. "No genetic trace, no record of descent. Witnesses describe him as ordinary, male, roughly middle-aged, of indeterminate origin. One report states he defeated a warband of heretics with a single strike." Vale frowned. "A mutant? Unlikely. He displays no mutation, no psychic anomaly. The Mechanicus sensors call him a void space. He registers as absent." That word lingered. Absent. Inquisitor Vale dismissed the adjutant with a nod and approached the central data slate himself. The man's image, grainy and colorless, hovered before him. A bald man in a simple tunic, staring at the camera as if mildly inconvenienced by being recorded. There was no arrogance, no menace, no divine light, only a faint boredom. And yet behind those eyes, Vale felt something he had not felt since his first day as an acolyte. Fear. Across the galaxy, similar reports began to surface. Ordo Xenos agents whispered of a lone wanderer, seen on worlds recently purged of Tyranid infestations. Ordo Hereticus clerics claimed that cult uprisings simply ended when he appeared, their leaders found unconscious, their idols shattered into dust. And in one remote manufactorum, servitors ceased functioning for 37 seconds when the man passed by, as if their machine spirits forgot what motion was. It was enough to spark paranoia, and paranoia was the lifeblood of the Inquisition. Soon, meetings were held in vaults sealed by adamantium. The three great ordos gathered, Hereticus, Xenos, and Malleus, each accusing the others of concealing information. None dared speak aloud what all were thinking, that this Saitama might not be of human origin at all. One Magos biologist suggested he was a construct, an ancient weapon, perhaps a remnant from the dark age of technology. A radical of the Xanthite school whispered that he could be a shard of the Emperor himself, walking unseen to test his children. Others feared something worse, a blank so powerful that even the warp recoiled. But the Inquisition's purpose was not to understand anomalies. It was to eliminate them. Orders went out. Kill teams were assembled. Data slates encrypted with kill directives were hand-delivered to the Grey Knights and the Officio Assassinorum. In the darkness of Luna's vaults, Vindicare assassins polished their rifles, yet none of them could find him. Every attempt to track Saitama ended in absurd failure. Vox beacons malfunctioned. Auspex arrays showed clear readings until the very moment he appeared, then displayed nothing but static. Agents who pursued him reported losing him in plain sight, as though their eyes simply refused to acknowledge his existence once he turned a corner. Inquisitor Vale began to suspect that he was not hiding at all. The universe itself simply refused to hold him in memory. He was not cloaked by sorcery nor aided by technology. He was in every measurable sense normal, and that normalcy was the most terrifying thing of all. On Terra, whispers reached the ecclesiarchy. Priests began inserting strange verses into their sermons, apocryphal additions about the fist of the emperor made flesh, and the faceless saint who shatters sin. Others called him the false Astartes, a heretic blasphemy sent to test the faithful. Pilgrims carried his name in secret prayers. In the lower hives, murals began to appear, crude paintings of a bald man standing over slain demons rendered in the style of imperial saints. No one claimed to have painted them, yet they appeared in the dead of night as if the walls themselves bore witness. The administratum began purging such images, but they multiplied faster than they could be erased. To the downtrodden masses, the idea of a man who could destroy monsters with a single strike, not through faith, not through technology, but by sheer human strength, was intoxicating. It was hope in its purest and most dangerous form. Vale saw it differently. Hope was a contagion, and contagions must be contained. He opened a sealed chamber beneath his flagship and activated a long-dormant servitor. Its flesh was metal, its eyes dull glass. It bore the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. Designation Exterminatus Protocol Beta 7, he commanded. Prepare orbital purgation patterns. Should confirmation be made of this entity's existence, the world is to be cleansed, the servitor acknowledged in flat binary. Vale stared out into the void, his reflection warped in the viewport glass. A man who cannot be measured, he muttered. That is the greatest heresy of all. But even as he spoke, somewhere deep within the warp, the Emperor's golden presence stirred again, faint, patient, amused. For while the Inquisition hunted their phantom, the Emperor watched with eyes that saw both the material and the immaterial. He saw Vale's ships move, saw their exterminatus torpedoes loaded, and did not intervene. Because perhaps this was the test. Perhaps even the most fanatical servants of the Imperium needed to stand before something that could not be catalogued, condemned or destroyed, and far below, in the rusted underbelly of the hive. Saitama sneezed, he rubbed his nose, glanced at the sky, and wondered why everyone around him looked so frightened all the time. He had no idea that at that very moment, an entire arm of the Imperium's secret order had declared him the greatest threat to mankind since the Horus heresy. The storm began without sound. A ripple in the sky above the hive, unseen by the naked eye but felt in the bones of those who dwelled below. Vox static deepened into a low hum. Lights flickered in the manufactoria. Servitors paused mid-motion, their optic lenses dimming as if the air itself had forgotten to conduct electricity. Then the silence broke, not with thunder, but with the arrival of a shape. It fell like a meteor, carving through the haze of the upper atmosphere and slowing just before impact. When the dust cleared, 12 figures stood upon the ashen ground, gold gleaming even through the soot. The Adeptus Custodes had descended. To the people of the hive, it was as though statues of living sunfire had stepped from myth into the mud. Each warrior towered over the crowd, their auramite armor inscribed with prayers older than cities. They moved not as men but as verdicts. Around them, Vox channels screamed as inquisitorial kill teams converged, forming a perimeter under the crimson banners of the Ordo Malleus. At the center of this converging storm, Saitama stood beside a food vendor, chewing on a skewered piece of grox meat. The vendor, too terrified to breathe, watched as one of the custodians approached, his shadow swallowing the street. "You are the anomaly," the custodian said. His voice filtered through a Vox grill like a god speaking through stone. "You will come with us," Saitama blinked. I just got here. Is something wrong?" The custodian raised his guardian spear. 100 laser guns leveled from the surrounding rooftops, each scope glinting under the smog-filtered sun. A Vindicare assassin watched through a kilometer of distance, his rifle sight fixed upon the bald man's heart. Inquisitor Vale's voice came through the comms. "Target confirmed. Terminate if hostile." But before any could act, something shifted in the air, a pressure drop. Like the pause before a world-ending storm, the custodian took a step closer, spear angled toward the man's chest. He meant no malice. His was a gesture of command, not cruelty. Yet in that instant, Saitama's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but confusion. He spoke softly. "Hey, could you not point that thing at me?" The custodian froze. The sound was gentle, almost apologetic, but it carried a weight that bent the air itself. Every psyker within a mile screamed as their link to the warp flickered, not from violence, but from absence. For the briefest heartbeat, the immaterium itself blinked. The custodian's armor groaned as the pressure mounted. His golden plate cracked along the seams, the sigils etched into it unraveling into light. One heartbeat later, the shockwave hit. The street shattered outward, stone and steel reduced to powder. When the smoke cleared, the custodian still stood, but his armor was fractured, his knees buried in the earth. Around him, every weapon had melted. Every servitor lay still. Saitama sighed, brushing dust from his shoulder. "Sorry, reflex." The inquisitorial forces fell silent. None dared fire. For the first time in 10,000 years, a custodian, the Emperor's own guardian, bowed his head, not in worship, but in bewilderment. His vox grill crackled. "You are not of the warp," Saitama shrugged. "Never heard of it." Inquisitor Vale, observing from orbit, felt the words ripple through his ship's auger arrays. The moment they were spoken, the vessel's Geller field fluctuated. Demons that had been clinging to its hull screamed and dissolved. Even the warp engines pulsed brighter, as though relieved to be near something untouched by their taint. Vale's hand trembled. "Shut down comms, now." But it was too late. Across the Imperium's long-range astropathic networks, the event had been felt. Not transmitted, but felt. A psychic silence spreads outward, consuming noise. On Cadia's ruins, a lone astropath bled from her eyes and whispered, "A world has gone quiet." Below, the custodian rose unsteadily. His spear was gone, reduced to molten fragments, but his honor remained intact. He stared at Saitama not as a threat, but as something older than the Imperium's language could define. "Who are you?" he asked. Saitama considered the question. He looked at the sky, scratched the back of his head. "Just a hero for fun," he said finally. The custodian did not understand the words, but the tone struck something deep within him, something beyond faith, beyond doctrine. He dropped to one knee. The Inquisition's kill teams faltered. Orders screamed through vox channels, but none obeyed. Some fell to prayer, others fled. From orbit, Vale watched as the Custodes, paragons of obedience, lowered their heads before a man who looked like a lost civilian. Rage boiled through him. "He's subverting them!" he shouted. "He's rewriting loyalty itself. Fire, fire!" But as the Exterminatus torpedo armed in its cradle, the ship's machine spirit hesitated. The Mechanicus adepts screamed in binary, slamming their fists into consoles demanding compliance. The machine answered with silence. Down below, Saitama looked up. He saw the faint glow of the descending weapon, a needle of light against the gray sky. His expression flattened. With a single hop, he was gone. The next instant, the torpedo exploded harmlessly in orbit, not from detonation, but from being punched. The fragments burned like falling stars across Terra's atmosphere, scattering harmlessly into dust. Every auspex on Vale's ship went dark. His crew stared into dead screens, the only light coming from the burning fragments outside the viewport. And there, floating in the void, Saitama hovered. No armor, no aura, just a man, staring curiously at a battleship large enough to blot out a continent. He looked through the glass, saw Vale's pale face behind it, and tilted his head. Then he smiled faintly and gave a small, apologetic wave, before descending back toward the planet like a falling leaf. Vale sank to his knees. In the silence that followed, he whispered, "We are ants who thought of ourselves as gods." When Saitama landed, the wind whispered through the ruined streets. The custodian was still there waiting, head bowed. Saitama approached, his tone casual. So, where am I exactly?" The custodian rose slowly, his expression unreadable behind the cracked helm. "You stand upon the cradle of mankind," he said. "Terra?" Saitama blinked. "Terra, huh?" Sounds familiar. And above them, unseen, the Emperor dreamed deeper still, his laughter echoing faintly through the veins of the throne. For the first time in 10 millennia, the galaxy was changing, not through conquest or prophecy, but through the simple kindness and boredom of a man who could end anything, yet chose not to. The silence following Saitama's descent spread like a wound through the hive's heart. Vox relays faltered, astropathic networks went blind, and for a single full day, Terra was still. No proclamations, no sermons, no movement of armies. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to explain what it had just witnessed. Within the palace, however, silence was never truly silence. Beneath the marble and gold, a million servitors clicked and whispered as data flowed into the throne's sensors. Their tongues of brass repeated impossible readings. Warp field collapse within a localized radius, psychic static nullified without interference, ambient radiation zeroed. They described a world that, for an instant, had forgotten how to sin. In the sanctum beside the throne, the custodes gathered in the Hall of Echoes. Their armor, once unmarred, was cracked and darkened by the lightless pressure that Saitama had released. None spoke of shame. None spoke of fear. They spoke instead of recognition. His strike unmade the void itself, said one. Yet he showed restraint. Another knelt beside the fractured relic of a guardian spear. He carries no weapon. Perhaps he is the weapon. At the end of the hall, Commander Valerian stood with his helm beneath his arm, the golden radiance of his armor dim under the candlelight. He had not knelt to any living being since his ascension to the 10,000. And yet, when Saitama had spoken those simple words, "Could you not point that thing at me?" Valerian had felt something ancient stir within his chest. Not submission, not faith, but humility. "Report to the Sigilite's chamber," he ordered. "The throne stirs. We must be ready." As the custodes departed, the Emperor's chamber shuddered. The cables that fed into his throne pulsed with golden light, brighter, faster. Servitors shrieked as their minds overheated. In the warp, a sound rolled outward. Not a scream, not a song, but a laugh. The Astronomicon flared, its signal doubling in strength for the first time since the Great Crusade. Ships light years away changed course mid-flight, their navigators weeping in joy and terror. In the choir chambers, psychers collapsed as the Emperor's dream deepened. He saw the man, that bald, expressionless wanderer, walking through the ruins of a world that had once been bright. He saw him speak to starving children, lift broken servitors from the dirt, repair them with a few flicks of curiosity. He saw him fight only when cornered, and even then, he struck without anger. The Emperor saw a man whose existence mocked divinity itself. He was reminded, painfully, of his own earliest dream, not of conquest, but of peace, the dream that had died the moment the first brother fell to ruin. A whisper moved through the immaterium. "He is what you wish to be." The Emperor did not answer. His laughter died. Below, Saitama had found his way into the outskirts of the upper hive, a place where the smog cleared just enough for the sky to appear faintly blue. He sat upon a shattered statue of the Emperor himself, legs crossed, munching on what the locals called ration bread. It tasted like chalk and ash, but he didn't mind. People gathered at a distance, workers, refugees, children. They whispered, pointing, unsure if they were witnessing a saint or a heretic. When one small boy dared to approach, Saitama handed him a piece of his bread. "There," he said with a grin. "It's not great, but better than nothing." The boy blinked, then took it reverently as though receiving sacrament. "Thank you, Lord." "Lord?" Saitama frowned. "Nah, just a guy." But the word spread. Lord, Savior, the first divine. By the end of the day, hundreds had come to kneel before him, their prayers blending into a low hum that filled the broken streets. Some brought relics, others gifts, all believing that the man who had survived the wrath of gods must himself be divine. Saitama didn't understand any of it. He only knew he couldn't walk 3 steps without someone asking for a blessing or a miracle. That night he sat on a ledge overlooking the hive, gazing at the stars hidden behind the pollution haze. "Man," he murmured, "you punch one guy and suddenly everyone loses their minds." He didn't know that his idle presence had created ripples that the Emperor himself could not ignore. Within the throne, a presence stirred, and faint but deliberate. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's mind reached outward not through command but through curiosity. And Saitama felt it. It wasn't a voice. It was a pulse of thought, a warmth like sunlight breaking through cloud. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Someone's calling," he said softly. Across the hive, Thousands of psychers screamed in unison. The Emperor's will had moved, not as command, but as invitation. From the deepest vaults of the palace, gates began to open. Custodes marched in silence. Servitors cleared pathways long sealed. The air thickened with incense and prayer as the Emperor summoned a visitor no mortal could imagine. Saitama stood, brushed dust from his cape and sighed. Guess I should go see what's up. When he began to walk, the earth did not shake. There were no trumpets, no thunder. Yet every man and woman who saw him pass felt a strange peace, the kind that comes only in the final moment before dawn. And as he approached the gates of the imperial palace, the sky above Terra split with a single beam of golden light. In the warp, the chaos gods fell silent, for in that moment, the Emperor remembered himself not as a ruler, not as a god, but as a man. And for the first time in ages, he wanted to stand. The gates of the imperial palace opened with a weight that seemed to press upon the stars themselves. Servitors scuttled aside, their limbs whirring as if they could sense the impossibility walking among them. Custodes formed an aisle, their halberds gleaming in the pale light that filtered through the palace's cracked windows. And in the center of this silent storm walked Saitama, barefooted, simple, utterly mundane, yet carrying a presence that bent reality itself around him. No one dared speak. Not the Custodes, not the Mechanicus acolytes who had been summoned in terror, not even the astropaths whose minds were tuned to the Emperor's pulse. Time itself seemed to wait. At the heart of the throne room, the golden throne sat immobile, a monument to both divinity and suffering. Its occupant was a corpse and a god, a man and a monument. Tubes ran like rivers from his flesh into the palace, feeding the Astronomicon, feeding humanity's endless war. Yet now his head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if sensing the intruder. Saitama paused before the throne, glancing up at the figure who had never truly slept, who had never truly spoken in 10,000 years. He scratched the back of his head. Nice chair," he said. "Big fan of furniture, huh?" A deep, hollow rasp echoed through the chamber. The Emperor's voice filtered through the throne, through machinery, through centuries of devotion. "You are unusual," Saitama tilted his head. "That obvious, huh?" The Custodes shifted slightly, their halberds lowering in unison. Servitors clicked nervously. Even the astropaths quivered as the air thickened with divine presence. "You walk without fear. You strike without anger. You are beyond understanding," the Emperor continued. Each word vibrated through Saitama's chest as if carried on golden wind. "Yet you do not claim dominion. You do not seek worship. You exist," Saitama blinked. "Yeah, I guess. I just do stuff when it seems fun. Usually that's enough." The Emperor's aura pulsed subtly like a heartbeat too slow to measure. It filled the chamber, stretching into every corridor, every vault, every corner of Terra. And yet there was no pressure, no compulsion, only awareness. A curiosity so vast it could unmake entire armies, and yet it rested on him like a father watching a son eat a sandwich. "You are the anomaly foretold," the Emperor said. "Even my Custodes, my servants, recognize something in you that they cannot name." Saitama shrugged. "Foretold, huh? Sounds serious. Not that I plan on ruling anything, I just punch." A ripple of energy passed through the throne. Tubes hissed. Servitors shuddered. One custodian fell to a knee, struggling against the weight of comprehension. It was a simple exchange, man to god, yet it carried the heft of millennia. The Emperor's hollow eyes, as if peering through time itself, observed Saitama. "You are a being of singular focus. You bear no malice, no ambition, yet your power is absolute. You are a paradox," Saitama nodded. "Pretty sure people have called me that before. Usually when I forget to eat lunch." The Emperor's quiet laughter filled the room. Subtle, almost imperceptible, yet resonating in the minds of all who bore witness. For the first time in 10,000 years, a part of him remembered what it was like to smile, not out of duty but out of recognition. "And yet," the Emperor continued, "the galaxy bends around you. The warp recoils. Even the orcs in their ceaseless hunger falter before you. You are untouched by everything that defines this universe." Saitama glanced down at his fists. "Untouched, huh? Guess that's fair. Makes fighting kind of boring sometimes." "Boring?" The Emperor's rasp was dry, almost amused. "To those who have watched eternity burn, your simplicity is extraordinary. For a long moment, neither moved. Time stretched, the air thickened, and the weight of uncounted years pressed against the mundane, unremarkable figure before the throne. And yet in that tension there was no fear, no threat. Only possibility. "You will not claim my throne," the Emperor said finally. "You will not seek to command men or gods, and yet, your actions shape the fates of billions. You are beyond the law of war and the law of life." Saitama shrugged again. "I don't want to. Honestly, I just want to eat, fight, and sleep." "Sounds like you've got that all figured out already." The Emperor's hollow eyes twitched. For the first time, he considered a thought not of strategy, not of war, not of human survival. A fleeting human thought. A universe with someone like him in it might be better, and perhaps that was the most dangerous thing of all. Beyond the throne, the warp shifted in tiny, imperceptible waves. Demons hesitated at the edges of reality, chaos itself recoiling from something that it could not comprehend. Even the Astronomicon pulsed with a warmth untainted by duty or death, a living acknowledgement of a force outside the cycle of suffering. Saitama yawned. "So, do we fight now, or?" The Emperor did not answer. Not in words, not yet. He merely watched, and in that observation, the universe seemed to pause, as if waiting for the simplest man alive to decide the next act of a galaxy-long story. And in that silence, Saitama's presence whispered an unspoken truth, that power without desire could bend reality itself, and that the greatest ruler was the one who did not wish to rule. Far beyond Terra, the void boiled with green fury. The Orkwag that had coalesced from scattered warbands now moved as one unstoppable tide. Gargants lumbered through asteroid belts, their massive engines tearing through the vacuum with monstrous shudders. Warboss Graxmasha the Immense bellowed from the bridge of his flagship, a throne of skulls and welded scrap, his eyes shining with the ecstasy of battle. "The boys are ready." Damanwat punched a noise.
"He can't hide no more."
Graxmasha roared, slamming his claw into the command deck. Sparks flew. The ship shuddered. Around him, weird boys cackled, firing their psychic energies into the void, seeking the pulse that had first awakened the thousands of light years away. Saitama had no idea that he was the axis of a galaxy-spanning frenzy. He was in a narrow alley, sampling a greasy slab of grox meat when the ground beneath his feet vibrated faintly. He frowned. That's new. In the outer hive sectors, orcs had begun landing in droves, bursting through Manufactoria walls, crushing servitors, and throwing themselves into impromptu battles against local militia. Yet every strike they made, every swing of a choppa or ram of a gargant was met with nothing. For Saitama, the arrival was subtle. He looked up just in time to see a warboss barreling toward him, a tower of muscle, iron, and bone. Its roar split the air, a sound meant to shatter skulls. Saitama blinked. You lost or something?" The warboss hesitated, not in fear but in confusion. Its clawed fists had shattered walls, yet now it found itself facing a man whose aura did not radiate threat, who held no weapon, who was so plainly human that it made the green tide stop mid-swing. Graxmasha's voice echoed in his skull through psychic resonance.
"Kill him!"
The warboss obeyed instinctively, charging. And in a single motion, Saitama raised a hand, a casual flick of the wrist. The warboss collided with an invisible wall, its momentum carrying it back into the ground with a resounding crack. Skulls shattered, armor melted. Warboss and boys alike tumbled like rag dolls. From orbit, the Inquisition observed in horror. Ordo Malleus analysts screamed that the readings defied all known physics, that the warp itself recoiled from the act. Psychers fainted as the psychic signature of the way flattened to near zero. Even the Chaos Gods themselves paused in laughter and rage, faltering. "Impossible," hissed Vale. It shouldn't be able to do that. Yet it was not impossible. It was natural. Down on the streets, Saitama sighed, brushing dust from his tunic. "Okay, that's done. Guess I'd better clean up the rest of you lot too." And so he walked. The orcs surged in a tide of green, shouting, roaring, bellowing threats that had toppled entire worlds. Gargants lumbered toward him, weapons firing promethium streams that ignited the streets. Boys ran screaming, swinging axes and choppas. But Saitama moved as if through mist. Each step ended threats not with fury but with ease. A punch here, a flick there, and the invaders crumpled into harmless heaps. No screams, no carnage, only the gentle finality of impact. Graxmasha, watching from orbit through a shattered Vox screen, realized too late that this was no ordinary human. He could feel it in the marrow of his bones. The universe itself had placed a wall between him and the man who could end the Wah. "Dis ain't real," he bellowed. "The boys ain't supposed to. His voice broke as a gargant was flung backward into a starship hull by a single, flat-handed slap from Saitama. The psychic resonance of the act echoed through the void like a shockwave, scattering fleets of orcs across kilometers of space, leaving the sky littered with smoking debris. The tide of green did not rage. It did not burn. It did not scream. It simply ceased. Where once there had been a wall of snarling, endless violence, there now lay silence. Broken machinery, crushed weapons, and stunned orcs stared at the man in disbelief. Saitama yawned. "Man, that's tiring." He glanced at the nearest boy who had collapsed mid-leap. "You all right, kid?" The boy twitched. "Wah-ga?" "Yeah, well, maybe don't wah. So much next time," Saitama replied, walking away. Above, Graxmasha howled in frustration. His war cry turned to nothingness, lost in the void.
The Wah!
That had threatened to engulf star systems had met the fist, and the fist had ended it. Not through malice, not through fury, not through anger or desire, but through a simple, effortless finality. In orbit, the Inquisition recalculated everything they knew. The orcs were neutralized. Entire fleets, entire warbands obliterated in minutes without a single effective countermeasure. Kill directives, exterminatus orders, orbital bombardments, all had been irrelevant. Vale sank into his chair. "The universe is broken," he whispered, "and we are the ants who thought ourselves gods." Below, Saitama wandered back into the hive streets, scratching his head. "Well, that was fun, kinda. I'm hungry again." And somewhere deep within the throne, the Emperor's laughter echoed, warm and resonant. For the first time in millennia, he did not think of war or control or dominion. He only thought of the man who could walk through infinite violence and remain untouched. And perhaps for the first time, the galaxy had someone who could truly change it. The hive city lay in an uncanny stillness. The streets, once writhing with chaos, orc shouts, and the endless machinery of survival, were quiet. Dust hung thick in the air, settling over crushed war gear, splintered servitors, and shattered emplacements. For the first time in memory, the lower hives felt safe, not from law, not from armies, but from the raw, unrelenting force that had always defined life here. The impossible had happened, and no one truly knew what it meant. Saitama walked through the rubble, his steps slow and casual, picking up a half-burnt loaf of bread. He chewed thoughtfully, paying little attention to the gawking citizens who followed at a careful distance. Children peeked from corners, whispering names that had not yet entered any scripture. The bald one, the fist, the stranger who ends all. Pilgrims began leaving crude offerings, scraps of cloth, toys, even broken weapons, as if the man's mere presence demanded reverence. Saitama glanced at them and shrugged. You don't have to, really." High above, in orbit, the remaining orc fleets floated inert, their engines dead, hulls pockmarked from attacks that had never landed. Inquisitor Vale, sitting in his flagship, rubbed his eyes. He had thought himself prepared for every contingency. Demons, Tyranids, renegade Astartes, even the most cunning heretic schemes. Yet nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for this. One man. One bald, bored, utterly ordinary man who had reduced the galaxy's most violent tide to silence with an almost careless flick of his hand. Down in the throne room, the Emperor of Mankind stirred. The tubes feeding from his corpse-like form hummed with renewed vigor, and the Astronomicon pulsed steady and bright. The custodes whispered among themselves no longer about duty but about wonder. The Emperor's hollow golden gaze seemed softer somehow, like the flicker of sunlight after a storm. Perhaps for the first time in 10,000 years, he remembered the possibility of a universe untouched by constant war. And yet, he remained the Emperor, vigilant, enduring, watching. But now there was a glimmer of amusement, faint and almost imperceptible at the notion that someone, wholly unremarkable by every canonical measure, had reminded him what it was to exist, unburdened by ambition, prophecy, or desire. Saitama wandered past the shattered manufactorium gates, where the faint hum of machinery had begun to reawaken. Servitors, no longer overwhelmed by warp disruption or psychic disturbance, resumed their tasks as though nothing had happened. But the people who had watched knew better. They had seen something impossible, and it had walked among them without malice, without decree, without reward. A lone custodian followed silently, distant yet vigilant, ensuring the world was safe from the next ripple of chaos. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Saitama's very presence had rewritten the rules of engagement. No army, no heresy, no monster could challenge him. And yet there was no arrogance in his stride, no trace of godhood in his gaze. Only a man who had finished what needed to be done and wanted nothing more than to rest, to eat, to continue walking. The Imperium, across its million worlds, felt the shockwave of the fist in ways neither fully measurable nor comprehensible. Reports would circulate, altered by rumor and awe. Orc warbands collapsed inexplicably, demons fled unseen, psychers felt calm rather than fear. Legends would be born. Saints would be written of him in hushed prayers. A new chapter in humanity's memory began, not of conquest, not of power, but of a presence that reminded mankind of simplicity, resilience, and the quiet strength that could withstand all else. Saitama paused on a crumbling stairwell, gazing up at the stars behind the smog. The glow of the Astronomicon reached him faintly, bathing the ruined hive in a gentle light. He yawned. "Man, that's a lot of trouble for one afternoon," he muttered. Then, without ceremony, he turned toward the nearest market stall. "Think I'll grab some meat." And above, in the golden chamber of the throne, the Emperor's whisper drifted, unheard by any but the warp itself. It was not command. It was not judgment. It was curiosity, wonder, and a faint, almost human amusement. Perhaps the universe is not yet lost. For Saitama, the galaxy remained as ordinary as ever. Yet for all who observed, all who measured, and all who survived, the impossible truth was undeniable. One man, utterly unremarkable yet unmatched, had walked through gods, monsters, and war itself, leaving only calm in his wake. The calm after the storm was not peace, not victory, not prophecy fulfilled. It was existence itself, raw, enduring, and astonishingly simple. And in that quiet, fragile truth, the Imperium found something it had not felt in millennia. The faint, shimmering hope that even in a galaxy defined by endless war, there could be a day without suffering. Saitama shrugged again and walked on, utterly unaware of the legend he had become. The stars flickered, the warp stilled, and Terra breathed. The universe, for once, waited, not for a ruler, not for a god, but for a man who had forgotten to fight for anything but what he chose to. And that was enough.